Once again, it appears like the Mets are waiting out Pete Alonso's market and free agency. The question is, will this strategy work again?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On today's show, we're talking about Pete Alonso in the first segment. I want to go through what the Mets' plan is with Pete Alonso in free agency. Are they once again hoping to just wait out the market and get him to sign a shorter-term deal, or is there a different ulterior motive? In the second segment, we're going to go through what the contract is that the Mets want to sign Pete Alonso to. Then in the final segment, we'll talk about how this strategy could blow up in their face. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. Want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. Well, Pete Alonso, once again, is sitting in free agency, and it doesn't seem like the calls are pouring in. Now, who knows exactly what's going on behind the scenes, but any insider or reporter that is giving us their take on where the market is for Pete Alonso basically continues to say that there is no real market for Pete Alonso, that Pete is going to struggle to get the years that he wants, that there aren't that many teams that are in on him. There has not been this picture painted of Pete Alonso being a highly coveted free agent. And in contrast, you see all the reporting on Kyle Schwarber right now, and it's, Kyle Schwarber is the linchpin to the rest of the market. Kyle Schwarber has the Pirates now who have offered him a 4-year deal north of $100 million. And the Pirates are also keeping tabs on Pete Alonso, reportedly. Not that I really buy that Pete would go there or that Schwarber would go there. I do think there's an outside chance that Schwarber might decide to sign with the Reds because that is his hometown team. Grew up in Ohio, and that's the team he grew up rooting for. So there's a chance that Schwarber goes out there. But it's most likely that Kyle Schwarber is going to land on a big market team like the Phillies, like the Red Sox, maybe the Mets. Who knows? And ultimately, if the Mets sign Kyle Schwarber, that's going to give us our answer on the Pete Alonso pursuit, because that would all but end the Pete Alonso pursuit. But let's assume that Kyle Schwarber just ends up going back to the Phillies. How are the Mets planning to play things out? Because once Schwarber's outside of the equation, you're going to find a really hard time trying to replace Pete Alonso's bat in free agency. I mean, you pretty much can't replace his bat in free agency if you don't sign Schwarber. You can hope that Munetaka Murakami comes over and has no issue with the transition to Major League Baseball, but that's not being realistic. There's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning for Murakami. And if not him, then who? Ryan O'Hearn and piecing it together? Sure, I like O'Hearn as a player. Can he replace Pete Alonso's production offensively? Not a chance. Do you get Cody Bellinger? Okay, that gives you an option, but Cody Bellinger is far more valuable in the outfield than he is at first base. So I still come back to the conclusion when you look at the market that the Mets would probably hope that Pete Alonso returns. But what are they waiting for then? It feels like they're waiting for the market to once again speak on Pete Alonso, and they're betting that it's going to echo what we saw or heard last year, where no market ever materialized. And if you're negotiating against yourself, you have a good chance at getting the deal that you want. If Kyle Schwarber signs with the Phillies, and then let's say the Boston Red Sox reunite with Alex Bregman, well, where is the Pete Alonso landing spot outside of those two places? They're the only other two teams that I think conceivably can make sense. And honestly, I don't even know if anyone has specifically pinpointed the Phillies with Alonso other than myself, just connecting the dots on if the Mets sign Schwarber, and they still needed a DH replacement, they could turn to Alonso. But really, all the reporting has just been the Red Sox and the Mets. That's sort of it. I've talked about in the past, could a team like the Nationals or the Angels, who aren't in a contention window but have money to spend theoretically, although it doesn't seem like the Nationals really will pony up and spend, even though they have nobody on their books, so they could. But those teams that theoretically could use Pete Alonso, there's been no linking that they're going to be in on Pete. And if you're the Angels, are you looking at Pete Alonso and saying, that's our guy, that's the guy that's going to help us win with Mike Trout? If anything, I think the Angels should be on Munetaka Murakami. They should be the team that says, screw it, we'll give the guy 8 years. Why not? But for Pete Alonso, finding a landing spot is so tough. And I do understand why the Mets are basically calling every and any bluff that Scott Boras throws their way, especially if the ask is still 7 years. If you call Scott Boras right now and Pete Alonso and he says the bidding starts at 7 years and $200 million or something insane, yeah, it's tough to negotiate with that. And you have to wait it out for him to become more realistic about the market that he has for his player. The question is, if all roads do lead back to the Mets, what's their goal? Is their goal to sign Pete Alonso to another deal with opt-outs, or they have something else in mind? That's what I'm going to talk about next here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can combine your live bets in a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout, and it keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving away $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins if you are a new customer. Again, new customers are going to get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You are already live, your team every day, but now you can take it up a level and go ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today. This was our big announcement for the week. There is now an Everydayer Club where you can get Locked On Mets with no interruptions. You also get a members-only Discord access and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. You go to lockedonmets.supercast.com, or you can check the link in the show notes to learn more. Again, you're getting Locked On Mets with no ads, no interruptions, and members only Discord access and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Let's talk about what the Mets' hope is with this Pete Alonso contract that they're trying to sign this offseason, assuming they do want to pursue Pete at some point. The one thing that I don't want to see happen is the Mets sign Pete Alonso to another 3-year deal with opt-outs. Well, I didn't sign him for a 3-year deal last year. It was a 2-year deal with opt-outs. But a 2 or a 3-year deal with opt-outs for Pete Alonso, just any contract that he can opt out of after the 2026 season, I don't want to do this again. And maybe it's just my own fatigue around the story, but the idea that is what could happen once again, it's maddening, because every single year you have to go right back through this. Pete Alonso either has a good year, hits free agency again, has a bad year, and he stays with you anyway. But every single time Pete Alonso has a great year, he's going to be in free agency, and once again, it's going to be will they, won't they, will they, won't they? At some point, isn't it just a better situation to lock Pete up to a longer-term deal? What is the harm or the risk in a 5-year deal for Pete Alonso? That's the part that I don't get. And I think the question really is, are the Mets open to that? Are they avoiding negotiating right now because the ask is still 7? Or has the ask already come down to 5 years and the Mets aren't even entertaining that? I imagine that it's not even at a point where terms and figures have even been discussed, because my assumption would be that Scott Boras is still trying to wait for a market to develop for Pete Alonso before he tries to loot the Mets back in and make something happen. But it's just the most agonizing thing to be playing out this situation once again a year later. And the thought of doing it a third time in a row in 2026, it's just too much. And I don't think that Pete Alonso has this great risk. If you want to tell me that you're hesitant to give Edwin Díaz a 5-year deal, that I can somewhat understand, just because Edwin Díaz, there's fluctuations in performance with relievers to a really great extent. You never really know what you're going to get. Edwin Díaz right now is 31 years old, but he's going into, I believe, his age 32 season. He turns 32 on March 22nd. Pete Alonso, happy birthday yesterday. Pete Alonso turned 31 years old on December 7th. I don't think there's that much risk in a 5-year deal for Pete. I don't. The guy plays every single day. He hasn't had an injury outside of getting blown up on the wrist one time in his entire career. And it's almost hard to remember which year that injury came in. I believe it was 2021, but it might have been 2023, and I can't tell because the least games he's ever played in a season is 152 back in 2021. There might have been 2 hand injuries. There might have been one in 2023 also. And if there was, he only missed 8 games. And Pete Alonso's data this past season got better. He swung his bat harder. He hit the ball harder. Everything ticked up. This guy might not look like an incredible athlete, but he really is. He trains really hard. He's an ox. And he is just, in my eyes, a player that you can count on to be there for 160, to hit you 30-plus homers, to drive in 100, to be a good at-bat in the middle of your lineup, and to be a good presence in your clubhouse and in the community. I don't understand why the Mets would be hesitant on a 5-year deal. Now, if it's about 5 years and the ask is $35 million or something crazy, I get that. Should the Mets go to 5 for 150 for Pete? That was my projected contract, but I also factored in deferrals that would have taken that AAV down to something closer to $26 million per. So then you're talking about more like 5 for 130. I think that what the Mets should be waiting this out for, the reason why they should be doing this again, is because they should get to a point, once you get through the holidays, if Pete Alonso is still unsigned, and man, that would be frustrating if this did drag on that long, but I think we're heading that direction, where you get him back into a room and you find a way to get a deal done. And what I would do, I would structure a contract that does a couple of things. For one, you give the guy 5 years. That's the first thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with committing 5 years to Pete Alonso at a team-friendly rate. Not $20 million per. I'm not saying 5 for 100. But something that pays Pete Alonso well, doesn't pay him, though, at the very top of the position at first base. And you lock in a guy that has meant a lot to your organization, that still fills a massive role on this team, because you need that big bat in the middle of your lineup. So for me, it'd be a 5-year deal. It'd be heavy deferrals. And if you wanted to, throw some escalators in that contract, because you know what? You might be able to get him even cheaper than what I was describing with the 5-year, $150 million deal with $50 million in deferrals. It might be even less money because there's just no other market for him. That's fine. Give him escalators. If Pete Alonso hits 40 home runs in a season, give him a couple $1 million. Give him $2 million. If he hits 45, tack on one more. Give him home run incentives. If he gets to 500 home runs in his career, incentivize him for it. If every time he crosses over a threshold, like he's about to come up on 300 home runs, give him a bonus when he gets there. I don't know. Throw enough escalators in that contract that he feels valued. But ultimately, I think you can get to a point where you're signing Pete Alonso to a better deal than whatever Kyle Schwarber is going to get in the market. I think because of the interest in Schwarber, if he's got the Pirates offering him $100 million, who's to say that the Phillies aren't going to sign him for 4 and 130, where he's getting north of $30 million a season over a 4-year deal. And if he is, great for Schwarber, but how much of a better player is Kyle Schwarber than Pete Alonso really? I know he's coming off a better season. I get that. But I don't understand why the market for Kyle Schwarber is at the extent that it is when he doesn't play a position. And Pete Alonso, who plays first base, no one's calling. Like, that part doesn't make a ton of sense to me when Schwarber is 2 years older, essentially, or a year and 9 months older. He's going into his age 33 season. So if Schwarber gets 4 years, is it that crazy for the Mets to give Pete Alonso 5? I just don't think it is. I think the one issue with playing this waiting game again is, what if another team does step up at the very end? You waited it out, you thought you were in a good spot, and then hold on, all of a sudden it is the Angels that call, or the Nationals that call, or maybe the Red Sox never did land Bregman, and they ultimately end up calling. And Pete Alonso ends up signing elsewhere. That's the thing that can still happen here, where the Mets would be in a world of hurt if they don't bring Pete back, and worse, if they wait it out. What happens then? We're going to go through it next. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why Game Time is clutch. The Game Time app finally gives fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging tickets. With Game Time, you can track prices in real time, get alerts when great seats open up, and you can buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back into your hands and makes going to the World Cup a realistic possibility instead of an impossibility. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets located and locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting through the fine print. Prices include fees up front, which I love, so there's no last second surprises at checkout, and you can set alerts for teams and matches to make it easy to grab tickets the moment they drop without missing out. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, every concert, or event with Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go to Game Time. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. All right, so let's now play out the scenario. The New York Mets have waited out Pete Alonso, but then at the 11th hour, someone swoops in and steals him. How long are the Mets going to wait without an alternative? And who's left on the market when they do? Last year, Pete Alonso signed with the Mets in February? It was 2-year, $54 million deal. When was it? February 12th. So they nearly waited until Valentine's Day to sign Pete Alonso, a couple weeks before pitchers and catchers reported. If that happens again, if they wait this thing out that long, is Ryan O'Hearn still going to be on the market? I don't think so. Munetaka Murakami definitely won't be on the market. He has a posting window he has to sign within. Are you then scrambling to make a trade with the team that you're trading with, knowing that you absolutely need their player? Or are you then calling up the Rays saying, hey, what will it take to get Yandy Diaz? And they say, well, Pete Alonso just signed with X team. Clearly you need him. It's going to cost you more. Same thing with Wilson Contreras. The alternatives dry up. The crazy thing about how everything has fallen so far this offseason is I think going into this winter, a lot of fans would have said, yeah, Edwin Díaz is the most important free agent for the New York Mets. Now, I don't think it's even close that Pete Alonso is more important than Edwin Díaz. And I know people will probably say I'm crazy for putting that out there like that, because how can you have a bullpen without Edwin Díaz? I'll tell you how you can have a bullpen without Edwin Díaz. Devin Williams is one of the best closers in baseball. Devin Williams, when he was asked about if the other teams that were offering him the closer job, he said, every team offered me the closer job. Is there a chance that the Mets did as well? Because maybe the Mets said, you know what, we can sign Devin Williams right now, 3 years, $45 million. Edwin Díaz wants 5 for over 100. So we don't want to pay Edwin Díaz $20 million a year to be our closer when we can get a guy that we think is comparable in Devin Williams, who's younger, who has really good stuff as well, isn't as dependent on velocity as Edwin Díaz is, because Devin Williams thrives on the separation between his fastball and his changeup. So you'd think that he might theoretically age a little bit better than Edwin Díaz, where if Edwin Díaz, instead of sitting 97, is sitting 94, I don't think he's the same guy. And if it's a 5-year deal instead of a 3-year deal, way more risk. I mean, you can make a case head-to-head. Whatever Edwin Díaz signs, Devin Williams is going to have a better contract for the Mets than Edwin Díaz, because either it's going to be a 3-year deal at a higher AAV, or it's going to be a longer-term deal at a similar AAV. And either way you slice it, Devin Williams is probably going to be on a better contract that is assuming Devin Williams can match Edwin Díaz's production. And I know that Mets fans, again, are you crazy that Devin Williams could be that good? You look at the past 5 years, and they've been pretty much the same guy. It's not crazy to think that Devin Williams might pitch to the back of the baseball card, and I get it. I know he had a rough first year in New York. It's a tough transition. But I, once again, point out 2019, Edwin Díaz pitched to a 5.59 ERA. Underlying data was good. Devin Williams pitched to a high ERA. Underlying data was good. And I assume that he is going to be a much better pitcher moving forward. So now that the Mets have Devin Williams, I'm not saying don't re-sign Edwin Díaz. Don't get my words twisted. I still would love for the Mets to bring back both Edwin Díaz and Pete Alonso. But I can see the roadmap to building out a good bullpen without Edwin Díaz, to taking the $21 million he might be asking for and splitting that up, where you still bring in a Pete Fairbanks or Robert Suarez at like 13 or 14 million per, probably for Fairbanks. That's the asking price. I'd imagine with Suarez, he's probably looking at 16 million plus. So maybe that's not as realistic, but could you sign Pete Fairbanks to a 2-year, $28 million deal, the same deal that Ryan Helsley got? I think he could. And then could you take that additional $7 million and go out and find another pretty good setup man on the market for that money? I think you probably could. Maybe instead of Edwin Díaz and then you're shopping with $5 million to get another setup man, maybe you take all together, like let's just say the Mets only have $30 million to allocate to their bullpen. Maybe you split that up across 4 guys. Maybe it's Pete Fairbanks, Tyler Rogers, and you grab a lefty too. Like all of a sudden, you could have a lot more options on the table. And that's something we'll talk about in a future show. How do you build a great bullpen without Edwin Díaz? I think that'll be a fun show to dive into. But my point stands, there are alternatives and roads the Mets can go down where they can find themselves having a good bullpen without Edwin Díaz. But can you find yourselves a good lineup without Pete Alonso? Kyle Schwarber, sure. You make that move, and I'll say that was a more than viable Pete Alonso replacement. Otherwise, I don't see it. I just would hate for the Mets to alienate Pete Alonso to the point that he just wants to be somewhere else, that he's done with being a Met. I don't think Pete's going to get in his feelings that much. I think Pete Alonso, when he finally signed last year and he was talking to the media and he essentially said he wasn't sweating it and kind of made it seem like he always knew he was going to come back. Or maybe that's the same thing this time. Maybe Pete Alonso is perfectly happy. He's got a new baby. He's just working out, doing his thing, and he knows eventually the deal is going to come. Maybe it doesn't put any strain on him whatsoever to not have a contract signed. I would think that it does, though. I would think that there is still part of the ego of any player that wants to be valued by your team, especially a team that you've done so much for. So I'd still be pursuing this thing, trying to get a deal done, and just putting the negotiation behind you. And I would not have any issues going to 5 years for Pete. I feel like you could get a pretty 5-year deal together that's team friendly if you work on putting some escalators in there and doing some things that can incentivize Pete, while still, of course, maintaining future flexibility. And I think you can find that medium now that Brandon Nimmo's off the books. I think you can find that middle ground with Pete Alonso where everything lines up. But the longer he waits, the greater risk there is that he's going to be alienated, and the more your alternative options fall off the board. I mean, if you were to pivot away from Pete Alonso right now and it wasn't Kyle Schwarber, you could still find your way to a good offseason. You could still sign Akamoto or Murakami, or you could still sign Ryan O'Hearn, and then maybe you're more aggressive on the outfield market. Maybe then you say, you know what? Kyle Tucker's in play. There's a lot of ways the Mets can do this thing, and I reserve, all the rights to judgment until after deals are made, when we actually have things to react to. But this is pretty much following the same tenor of last offseason with Pete Alonso, where we're just hearing nothing. No teams that are in, and no work on the Mets getting a deal done. And I just hope that once again, the Mets' patience is rewarded and it's not a game of chicken that ends badly for the New York Mets. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. I will be out of town this week, but the shows will not stop. I'm just not going to be on camera. It'll be audio-only shows for the rest of this week, reacting to all the latest with the winter meetings. So we're not going to lose any coverage. It's just going to look a little different if you're watching on YouTube. That's all. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And again, if you want to be part of our Everydayer Club, you want to go to lockedonmets.supercast.com, and that's going to get you access to the members-only Discord, as well as Locked On Mets with no interruptions. Again, that is lockedonmets.supercast.com, or you can check the show notes and find the link in the episode description.